This is the news in brief from the United Nations. Reports of serious sexual violence and the use of live rounds on protesters in Sudan at the weekend must be investigated immediately. The UN Rights Office, OHCHR, said on Tuesday. The allegations surfaced after demonstrations in Khartoum on Sunday, where tens of thousands gathered to mark the third anniversary of protests that led to the overthrow of longtime President Omar al-Bashir. Demonstrators who made for the presidential palace were also protesting against October's military coup, said UN Rights Office spokesperson Liz Throssell. Speaking in Geneva, Ms Throssell said that security forces are alleged to have raped or gang-raped 13 women and girls. 2 protesters also died after being shot, and around 300 others were injured.
With further protests planned for this weekend and the weeks ahead, it is crucial that security forces guarantee and protect the right to peaceful assembly and act with full respect for international laws and standards regulating the use of force.
The UN Rights Office spokesperson urged the Sudanese authorities to launch a prompt investigation into the allegations of sexual violence, as well as the reported use of live ammunition against protesters trying to enter the presidential palace. Staying with the UN Rights Office, which has also called on Belarus and Poland to resolve the crisis affecting thousands of migrants and refugees on their shared border. The situation is appalling, and both countries should act in line with international law to help all those who face dire conditions on both sides of the border, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights said. The development comes after UN rights investigators returned from an official visit to Poland, where they interviewed families who had arrived from Belarus between August and November this year. Those interviewed described dire conditions on both sides of the border, with no or limited access to food, clean water and shelter, often amid freezing temperatures. The majority said that in Belarus they had been beaten or threatened by security forces, also alleging that the Belarusian security forces forced them to cross the border, instructing them when and where to cross, and had prevented people from leaving the border area to return to Minsk. Several interviewees also said that security forces in Belarus, which did not allow access to the UN officials, had demanded extortionate sums for food and water. Finally, nearly 5,000 refugees who fled violence in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or DRC, 4 years ago, are opting to head home voluntarily from Zambia in coming months, with the first 100 people setting out on Tuesday. Announcing the news, UN Refugee Agency UNHCR said that security had improved sufficiently in DR Congo's Pweto territory, Haut-Katanga province, for them to go home in safety and dignity. Inter-ethnic clashes, as well as fighting between Congolese security forces and militia groups in parts of southeastern DRC in 2017, have uprooted communities. The voluntary repatriations, as they are known, follow surveys by the UN Agency of Congolese nationals who've been sheltering at a Zambian refugee camp in Luapula province since 2018. Around 20,000 refugees have already left Zambia in the past 3 years to return to DR Congo. Together with the UN World Food Programme, the UN Refugee Agency is offering food and transport to those wishing to return to DR Congo, plus a small cash grant to help them pick up their lives again. Top priorities for the UN include working with authorities in DR Congo and development partners, including Catholic Aid Confederation Caritas, to promote reintegration projects in education, health and agriculture. Today, Zambia hosts 103,000 refugees, asylum seekers and former refugees. These include more than 63,000 from DR Congo. Daniel Johnson, UN News. This is the news in brief from the United Nations. 8 million people in Yemen may have to be given reduced aid rations because of funding shortfalls, the UN World Food Programme, WFP, said on Wednesday. The development comes as families already hit hard by years of war continue to struggle to support themselves, with currency devaluation and hyperinflation driving the economy to near collapse. In an alert, WFP said that food prices have more than doubled across much of Yemen this year, while fighting across multiple front lines continues to force families to flee. WFP's Corinne Fleischer, Regional Director for the Middle East and North Africa, said that the agency had no choice but to focus on those most in need. They include 5 million people who are at immediate risk of slipping into famine. They will remain on a full ration, WFP said. Over half the population of Yemen, or 16.2 million people, face acute hunger, and 1 in 2 children under 5 is at risk of malnutrition. WFP needs $813 million to continue to assist the most vulnerable in Yemen until next May. As many friends and families consider whether to celebrate Christmas together, the UN Health Agency WHO issued a reminder on Wednesday that anyone who ignores COVID-19 is perpetuating it. That message came as the World Health Organization explained that the coronavirus was far from over, not least in its eastern Mediterranean region. Latest modelling data indicated that the 22 countries and territories of the region would probably see more than 17 million cases and more than 314,000 deaths by the end of 2021. 14 countries in the eastern Mediterranean already have the Omicron variant, but more research is needed before its impact on existing vaccines, diagnosis and treatment is understood, said WHO Regional Director Dr. Ahmed Al-Mandari. He said that although everyone is tired of hearing about COVID-19 and of all the restrictions it imposes, we need to face an undeniable fact: the virus is still very much present among us. The WHO medic urged everyone everywhere to continue to follow all COVID precautions, while insisting that anyone who disregarded the reality of the virus was directly contributing to its ability to endanger and disrupt our lives. Globally, COVID-19 has claimed more than 5 million lives and infected over 270 million people. To Indian-administered Kashmir now, and a call on Wednesday from UN-appointed independent rights experts for the release of a prominent rights activist who's been detained under counter-terrorism legislation. The appeal, led by the UN Working Group on Enforced Disappearances, is for Khurram Parvez, who has documented serious human rights violations, including enforced disappearances and unlawful killings. Since his arrest last month, Mr. Parvez has been held at the Rohini jail complex, one of the 3 most overcrowded and unsanitary prisons in the country. There is a clear and immediate risk to his health and safety, in particular from COVID-19, the experts said in a statement. They also highlighted how Mr. Parvez's arrest followed an amendment to anti-terror legislation. This allows any individual to be designated as a terrorist and has led to a worrisome rise in the number of arrests across India, and especially in Indian-administered Jammu and Kashmir, they said. Daniel Johnson, UN News.
This is a news in brief from the United Nations. The aid situation in the occupied Palestinian territories is an existential threat, the head of the UN's Relief Agency for Refugees there warned on Thursday. Philippe Lazzarini, Commissioner General of the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, or UNRWA, said that drastic funding shortfalls threaten further essential services to millions and could lead to its collapse. Some 5.6 million Palestinians have registered with UNRWA as refugees in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, Lebanon, Syria and Jordan. In an open letter, Mr. Lazzarini highlighted how chronic underfunding, along with political attacks on the agency's mandate, threatened to sever the lifeline of education, healthcare and social welfare as provided by UNRWA. The agency chief acknowledged that for close to a decade now, stagnating donor funding remained below the amount needed to provide quality services. At the same time, as the refugee population has continued to grow, poverty and vulnerabilities have skyrocketed. To promote long-term funding security, Mr. Lazzarini said that the agency would expand its donor base, increase digital funding, and look into innovative ways to ensure that Palestine refugees continue to have access to services. No country can boost its way out of COVID pandemic. That's the message from the UN Health Agency, which has also said that people should fight like mad for global vaccine equity. At a press conference on Wednesday evening, World Health Organization Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus warned that national booster programs will likely prolong the pandemic rather than end it. This is because vaccine supplies will be diverted to countries that already have high levels of vaccine coverage, giving the virus more opportunity to spread and mutate in nations that have not received enough jabs, he said. The agency's technical lead for COVID-19, Dr. Maria Van Kerkhove, said that it was still too early to conclude whether the Omicron variant is less severe than Delta, but that people who were vaccinated had a much lower risk of developing severe disease and death.
Regardless of what information we do find out about Omicron and the different vaccines that are in use, it is better to be vaccinated than not. So if you hear anything from us today, please hear that and get vaccinated when it's your turn and fight like hell for vaccine equity for everybody else around the world.
Tedros insisted that available vaccines were effective against the Delta and Omicron variants, and that the global priority must be on supporting countries to vaccinate 40% of their populations as quickly as possible and 70% by the middle of 2022. to the UN Security Council now, which has agreed to ensure that aid funding can assist millions of hungry people in Afghanistan. The move came as UN Emergency Relief Chief Martin Griffiths warned about shocking levels of need and suffering amidst a free-falling economy and billions of dollars of frozen foreign assistance since the Taliban takeover in August. Adopting the text on Wednesday, the Council's 15 members supported that humanitarian assistance be excluded from existing sanctions against individuals and entities associated with Afghanistan's de facto rulers. This humanitarian exception will allow organizations to implement the work we have planned, Mr. Griffiths said, adding that it would give legal assurances to the financial institutions and commercial actors we rely on to engage with humanitarian operators. Mihika Acharya, UN News.